With the first topic, and the context of that topic is that in its 2025 staff report, the IMF retained a C grade for India's national accounts because they noted that there were various shortcomings and issues with regard to the GDP calculation, the methodology that we are using. And they said that this hampers effective surveillance on Indian economy. Why it is important? Let's try to understand. So what exactly happens? This IMF, which was created after World War II, initially its role was limited to stabilization of currency, promoting international trade, etc. But with time, its role also evolved, and now it is one of the important crisis manager, global lender, as well as it also acts as economic advisor to the global economies. And why is it important? The thing is that, let's suppose the Sri Lankan economy, which was facing severe liquidity crisis, they were on the verge of default after COVID-19. Why? Because the Sri Lankan economy was highly dependent on tourism itself, and after COVID-19, tourism took a hit because of the quarantine measures, lockdown, etc. which were there. And the Sri Lankan economy, the government also did various other blunders. For example, they shifted to organic farming, and that too the shift was not gradual, and which impacted the production of agricultural commodities and which also increased inflation in the economy. So because the Sri Lankan economy was on the verge of collapse, they asked IMF for liquidity, that they wanted some funds under the rapid credit facility. So there are various programs which are there by IMF, under which it lends to various global economies. There is extended fund facility, there is rapid credit facility, rapid financing instrument is there. So under these programs, short-term and long-term funds are given to the different economies. But whenever IMF is giving loans or funds to different economies, it is tied to several conditions, that until and unless these conditions will be met, these reforms will be taken by the economies, the funds will not be given. For example, in 1991 itself, India went with various reforms like LPG, etc. That is, in the same fashion, whatever the funds that are being given to Pakistan, that is again linked to various reforms that they need to take. Whatever the funds that were given to Sri Lanka, that was again linked to various reforms. But how exactly IMF will be getting an idea whether those reforms which were earlier agreed upon, whether that economy is going for that reform or not? It is because of different macroeconomic indicators that they will be watching, based on which they will get an idea whether those reforms are being taken by the economy or not. For example, if the IMF is saying that you change your methodology of the GDP calculation, and whatever the global norms are there, try to follow that. So whatever the GDP data that is coming, if they will not keep a watch on that, they will not get an idea whether reforms are being taken by the economy or not. And in future, if the country will again ask for fund, the IMF can deny because those reforms were not taken. And the board that decides for various decisions which are taken by the IMF, whether loans should be extended or not, they cannot go into all the data with regard to the economy. And that is the reason this IMF staff report, which is there under the Article 4 consultation annual review of member economies, that is part of IMF Article 4 consultations, this grading actually gives an idea, as well as it reduces the time for the decision making for the boards of the IMF. That is the reason IMF's staff keep a watch on all the economies, and they also want to ensure that they are having a surveillance on the major economies, so that in future, if there is a crisis that may come, this can be anticipated in a time-bound manner, and that can be averted. And that is the reason they want most global economies to shift to a standard norm which is being followed by most of the countries, which is being followed by the developed countries. Now, what exactly is the case with India? First of all, these IMF team visits country, they assesses the data quality that is there. Because let's suppose the data that is coming, that is distorted, that is not giving a true picture of the economy. That means that the IMF is getting an idea with the help of that data that everything is happening good in the economy. But in true sense, economy is not doing good. So that is the reason they also looks up to what is the methodology with the help of which that data is coming. Also, based on that, they prepares a surveillance report, and on the basis of that report, on the basis of this grade that is given to the national accounts of the country, further decisions will be taken by the board of the IMF. Also, these grades which are given, for example, they are categorized in A, B, C, D, whatever the grades generally we were also getting in our schools. A is adequate, that whatever the norms are there, whatever the methodology that is being used, whatever the data with regard to the national accounts are coming, that is sufficient, that is completely fine. Then B is broadly adequate, but there are some minor issues which needs to be fixed. Then C is, there are some shortcomings, but because of which the surveillance somewhat is getting hampered. That there are shortcomings, and they are to that extent that it is impacting the surveillance. Then there are D, which shows that there are serious shortcomings with regard to the national accounts and the data and the methodology that is being used. Now with regard to the India's data of 2025, first of all, the overall B rating is there, but with regard to the GDP data, we got a C grade. And why exactly that is happening? Because there are various issues that we will be discussing in detail, that why exactly this C grade we got for the GDP data. But before that, we need to understand, for example, for July to September quarter, what is the latest data? That is we are having 8.2% of GDP. Also, what we need to understand, that this has beaten the expectations of the market, that people were expecting that it will be between 7 to 8%. But we are getting 8.2% of GDP growth, which is historically very high. And that is the reason it creates various apprehensions for various economic commentators, that whether this data is properly coming or not. For example, for earlier July to September quarter, this GDP growth rate was around 5.4% earlier, and then it was revised to 5.6%. Again, that raises eyebrow, that whether the data is properly, we can rely on that data or not. If we talk about the other categories or the other aspects and components that we can say that were taken into account to give the this grade to the Indian national accounts, with regard to the prices, that is indices that are coming with, which is giving an idea about the inflation in the economy. Then the fiscal category, for example, the deficits which are there, how exactly the government is maintaining their accounts, whether it is current account, capital account, whether the deficits, the picture of the deficit is coming properly in the open domain or not. Then with regard to the external category, the balance of payment status, what is current account balance, what is the status of forex reserve. Then for example, for monetary category, what is the monetary policy mechanisms that is being used by the central bank. And for all these categories, we generally retained the B grade, but majorly it was the GDP data for which we got the C grade. Now IMF observation was that India needs better quality, availability as well as timeliness of macro data. Now let's try to understand what are the specific concerns which are highlighted by the IMF. First of all, what exactly is the GDP? It is total monetary value of all the goods and services that are produced in the domestic territory during a financial year. So there are three methods based on which this GDP is calculated. One is output approach, second is income approach, and third is the expenditure approach. NSO, which actually calculates the GDP, and it is under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. They calculates this GDP on this value added method or output approach, and they also does this with the help of expenditure method. They do not calculate with the help of income approach because of various data constraints. Now this output approach or value added method, that focuses on whatever the value of all the goods and services that are produced in a country during a specific period. Now whatever the value which is added by all the economic activities for all the sectors at each stage of production, when we will add all that, then we'll get the GDP by value added method or output approach. Then we have the income approach, which gives us an idea about the total income which is earned by all the factors of production within a country during a specific period. For example, there are 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital, and then we have the entrepreneurship. For land we are getting rent, for labor we are getting wages, for capital we are giving interest, and for entrepreneurs they are getting profit itself. If we will add all these earnings which are being done by the 4 factors of production, we can get this GDP by income approach. And the third approach is the expenditure approach, that whatever the spending which is being done on all final goods and services which are produced in the economy. There are 4 components. One is the household consumption expenditure, whatever me and you are spending for buying toothpaste or various other products which we are using, whatever the expenditure that me and you households are expending. Then there is private investment, whatever the investment that is being done by the businesses, corporations, etc. Then government spending is there, under which whatever the spending that they are doing on the daily businesses, for example salaries, etc., or whatever the investment that they are doing for some of the tangible assets. Then the net of exports, that is export minus import. When we will add all these 4 components, we can get this GDP by the expenditure approach. Now, one of the major specific concern which is highlighted by the IMF is that whatever the data that government is giving, ministry is giving, there is huge discrepancy with regard to the value added data and with regard to the expenditure data. That ideally, both these data should give a correct, should give a similar picture. The data, there should not be divergence between two data, but there is a huge discrepancy with regard to the data that is coming from output approach and expenditure approach. Also, if you see that what is the methodology that is as of now being used for the GDP calculation. If you see pre-2015, the base year was 2004-5. For example, there are two types of GDP with regard to the prices which we are taking into account. One is real GDP and second is nominal GDP. So let's suppose let's suppose it was 2024 and this is 2025. In the economy, 20 chocolates were produced in 2024 and the price of each chocolate was 10 rupees. And let's suppose only chocolates are being produced in that economy. So here we can say the GDP will be 200. Okay. And in 2025, let's suppose again 20 chocolates were produced, but the prices of all the chocolates increased to 20 rupees. Why? Because there is increase in the cost of raw materials, there is increase in the labor cost, or the capital became costlier, etc. Because of which the prices of chocolates increased to 20 rupees. Now what will happen when we will calculate this at current prices? Then we will get the nominal GDP, that is 20 into 20 equal to 400. But when we calculate the real GDP, that is calculated at fixed prices, which is fixed by a base year itself. Now here the real GDP will again be 20 into 10. Let's suppose 24 was the base year where we have taken the price of that particular 24 as the base year, that was 10 rupees per chocolate. So real GDP for that year will be 200, whereas the nominal GDP for 2025 will be 400. So that is one of the reasons why we keep a base year, also to get a comparison over the previous year, that what is the growth that is happening with regard to the size of the GDP. And whenever we say that GDP is growing, we generally say that we generally talk about the real GDP. Also, the GDP which was calculated earlier before 2015, it was at the factor cost, and then at present time it is calculated at market prices, which includes the taxes, etc. Now factor cost means whatever the cost that we need to pay on these four factors of production, whereas these when we talk about market prices, it also incorporates the impact of taxes. And manufacturing data that we were getting earlier, that was from industrial production index and annual survey of industries which were being done. Now this annual survey that was being done, they were not giving a true picture because of the limitation with regard to the surveys that we can get. So again, it was not covering informal sector comprehensively, plus it was not giving a true picture of the economy. And after 2015, we shifted to this MCA 121 database, Ministry of Corporate Affairs 21 database, where every company needs to mandatorily submit their data with regard to the production, etc., that they are doing with regard to the revenue, and based on which we were calculating the GDP. Also, as of now, this gross value added is at basic prices. That means that taxes and subsidies are further included. So we have the GDP at market price, where we incorporate GVA at factor cost plus GVA at basic price plus product taxes minus product subsidies, and then we also have the GVA at basic price, where we calculate GVA at factor cost, all the factor costs that we are seeing here, plus production taxes and minus production subsidies. So GVA basic price we are calculating, where we are calculating first GVA at factor cost plus production taxes minus production subsidy. Then when we are calculating GDP at market price, then we are incorporating GVA at basic prices plus product taxes minus product subsidies. So it is giving a more comprehensive picture. Plus the only farm produce were being incorporated when we were taking agriculture sector, but now the post 2015 we were including livestock data and other agricultural activities. Now here again another concern which is being highlighted by the IMF is here itself, that our base year is outdated. It is 2011-12 still, that this base year is outdated, and that is the reason we are not getting a true picture of the economy. Also, there are various other issues, for example, lack of coverage of the informal sector. Then again, to calculate the real GDP and the nominal GDP, the indices that are used, they are majorly the WPI wholesale price index and the CPI. But globally, the more prudent norm is PPI, that is producer price index. Let's also try to understand that what are the different type of inflation indices. So CPI, that is consumer price index, that tracks the change in retail price of goods and services, and these are the goods that we household purchase for our daily consumption. For example, the chocolates that we are buying, or the toothpaste, toothbrush, etc., whatever we are buying. And earlier base year for this was 2012, but now it is being revised. Also, it is again released by NSO of under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Then we have the wholesale price index, which is released by Office of Economic Advisor under Ministry of Commerce and Industry. That represents the prices of goods at wholesale stage, that is goods that are sold in bulk and they are traded between organization instead of consumers. Here again, if you see, the base year is 2011-12, and if you talk about all the commodities which are covered in WPI, primary articles weight is 22.62%, manufactured products have a huge weightage of 64.23%, and fuel and power are having the weightage of 13.15%. And then we have the producer price index, that is PPI, which measures the wholesale price from the point of view of the producer of goods and services, and that tracks prices at different stage of production. For example, whatever the change that is happening with regard to the raw material cost, what is the changes that is happening with regard to the logistical cost, what is the change that is happening with regard to the wages, etc. If we will give this idea we can get with the help of producer price index, that what is the change that is happening at production stage itself. So this PPI looks at inflation from the viewpoint of industry and businesses and measures the price changes that is happening before the consumer purchases the final goods and services. So globally, PPI is generally kept into account to get an idea about the nominal and real GDP, especially the real GDP, where we adjust the inflation, because in the real GDP inflation is adjusted, whereas in nominal GDP inflation is unadjusted. So we continue use of this wholesale price index instead of this producer price index that distorts the real GDP estimates. Also, this GDP rebasing, which is overdue, it was last updated 2015. Also, the lack of timely consolidated fiscal data, the data that is coming with lag, there is no coherence between the center and the state with regard to the data that is coming. Plus the population census that is overdue. It was we needed data of 2021 census, but again it is announced now. A few months back it was announced, but that data is also overdue. So that is also not giving a true picture about the population. So the per capita GDP, per capita income, etc., that data also we are not getting properly. And there are other historical issues which we have just discussed with regard to the large revision and inconsistencies between the GDP by activity and GDP by expenditure, which we just discussed, the distorted data between the output approach or value added method and the expenditure approach. Along with that, the IIP, which is giving an idea about the industrial status, that what is the status of the industrial growth. So here again, the manufacturing is having 77.63% weight, mining is having 14.3% weight, and electricity is having 7.99% weight. Again, the base year for this is outdated, which government has announced to change. And these are some of the reforms which government is going to do, with the help of which we will be probably getting much better data. For example, the new GDP series, for which the base year has changed to 2022-23. It will be changed to 2022-23, and it will be launched around February 2026. That will include the new methodology as well as new data sources. For example, GSTN network will be used to get the data that will give a true picture of the consumption expenditure that will be done. Along with that, they will also try to get the data from the different limited liability companies, LLP, etc., as well as various other establishments, so that they can cover the informal sector along with the other corporations like LLP in a more comprehensive manner to get a true picture. And the first quarterly data will cover around October to December quarter of 2025. Also, the consumer price index CPI series, that is also the base year for which is going to be revised for 2024, and it will again be releasing around February 2026. Plus, the most importantly, it will be based on household consumption expenditure survey of 2023-24. Whatever the basket of the goods that are kept under the CPI, right, that is again outdated. The people's choices have shifted. They are now shifting to some new products, so we can't give a true picture of CPI based on the old basket, and that is the reason it is going to rely on household consumption expenditure. That will give an idea what exactly people are consuming, based on which we will give an data about the inflation. Also, other updates, for example, IIP, that is Index of Industrial Production, again base year for that will be 2020-23. Along with that, another thing that we need to understand, that here, for example, the PPI which the IMF is saying that we should shift, that will also comprehensively cover services part, which is not as of now being covered because of the WPI related adjustments that we are doing. Also, as of now, the RBI is giving the balance of payment data, current account balance, etc. at quarterly basis, but again they are preparing to give this data monthly basis to again give a true picture. And our chief economic advisor said last year that there is need for deregulation, better hiring policies, more state capacity that is needed for higher growth. So there is need for deregulation of the sectors. Along with that, there is need for further identifying the issues which are there with regard to the policies which are coming, with regard to the methodology that we are taking into account. Because when we'll get a proper data, and if the global confidence will increase, or even the Indian commentators which are related to economy, when their confidence will increase that data, the reliability of that data will further increase. For example, recently it was said 8.2% GDP growth rate. There are some people who find it little difficult to believe that this much of growth rate can be possible at present rate. So if we are targeting our $5 trillion economy, which we need to achieve by 27-28, which is the current target, or the vision of Viksit Bharat or developed India, which we are going to achieve by 2047. So we need better data, better methodology. Along with that, the other issues which are there in the economy, like the issue of regulation, over-regulation of some sectors, overlapping of jurisdiction between center and states, issues with regard to the compliance, with regard to the hiring policies, etc. that needs to be addressed. For example, government came with GS3 2.0, that is again leading to a more rationalized regulation. It will improve the compliance. They already announced the labor codes that will again improve the hiring policies. They are again coming with some other specific schemes like employment linked incentive scheme that will again provide incentives to employer as well as employee, that will further improve the hiring policies. So if all these programs and the policies which are coming by the government, which are coming from the government, if there will be a proper oversight mechanism, we can ensure that we are getting best from these changes that are happening. Plus, that can also help us in getting the that will help us in achieving the targets that we have already made. This is a question that was asked in 2020 prelims examination. Please answer this question in the comment box. This is related to different indices that are used by India as well as the Reserve Bank of India, and this is a mains practice question that you people can write from this topic.